Senator Rice.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in smart traveller advice, particularly for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex and queer people. I mean, given that LGBTI people are a specific group targeted by, or prone to prejudice, violence, legal persecution, and as we've seen, it can change and escalate in various places around the world. I want to know what the framework that's been established on both the Smart Traveller site and more broadly in sort of the provision and dissemination of advice from the department.
Thank you, Senator. The Smart Traveller website has a specific LGBTI page now to provide some advice to LGBTI travellers. And on the specific country pages, I can't say we have LGBTI advice on every single country page yet, but we're working our way through, and I think it would certainly be over. My impression is thinking about 2/3 of the travel advice would have that in there specifically now, and we'll work our way through all of them.
Right. And have you done any engagement with the LGBTI community here in Australia to determine their needs as travellers?
I will take that on notice, Senator.
Right. So you don't know that you have done any. Would you be the person to know that if you had done any?
Yes.
Yes.
We did a lot of consultation of various different focus groups and traveller groups, but it was a couple of years ago, and I don't recall specifically, which is why I said I would take it on notice.
And given
we don't do, if this is your question, consistent consultations with those groups any more than we do with a lot of the other groups. We simply don't have enough staff to be doing that consistently across every interest group. We think it's a particular issue for us and for Australian travellers, but we're reasonably confident of the mechanisms for looking at what is needed by travellers of all sorts.
I mean, given the escalation in, like Aceh, in Indonesia, in Chechnya at the moment, are you considering the need to do more consultation in terms of what the needs and revising the advice that's being given to travellers?
Well, my own interest in the first instance is trying to drive it through all the different travel advices. So specifically in the one you're talking about, our Indonesia travel advice doesn't yet have specific advice for LGBTI travellers, which I think is a gap that we have to address fairly soon. We're in consultation with our mission in Jakarta about what the appropriate advice should be. It mostly relates to what local laws are, the level of comfort with LGBTI travellers, countries where there may be no laws against homosexual behaviour, but where cultural practices are opposed to it or where they're very conservative communities. So it's more about ensuring the LGBTI travellers have the awareness they need when they choose to travel to a place.
So are you looking at urgently updating the information that's available for Indonesia and Aceh? Because at the moment, issues of homosexuality in Indonesia don't even appear under the heading laws or other laws, but under local customs on your Indonesia page. And you've got to go through, and when it comes to Aceh, it talks about Sharia law, and then inform yourself about the laws. If in doubt, seek local advice, which actually could be extremely dangerous. So do you acknowledge that that's currently inappropriate advice for people travelling in Aceh?
As I said, we need to update the Indonesia travel advice for LGBTI travellers.
Yeah, so
I'm agreeing with your position.
And you do acknowledge that advice actually is dangerous at the moment for people to be asked to seek local advice.
Local advice means country advice, so Indonesian advice. I can't claim that our travel advice will ever be the sole source of information that Australians should go to for advice on travelling in any country. And that means we really are urging Australians to be self-reliant, all kinds of Australians, and that includes informing themselves, not relying solely on the advice we provide. We should never be the only stop for an Australian trying to think about how to travel. We provide pointers, some broad ideas, some warning points, but you should never be travelling solely on the basis of what we say. You should be informing yourself first.
But in fact, but would you agree that it's suggesting to LGBTI travellers that it would be appropriate to seek local advice could indeed be very dangerous, and it should be exactly what you should not be recommending them to do?
Local advice in this case actually refers to Indonesian level advice, but you're right, it could be misleading in this case.
Yes. So would you consider removing that as a matter of urgency from your site?
We will look at the overall language, Senator, if you wish.
And what processes and policies have you developed to support LGBTI Australians who find themselves caught up in prejudice and anti-LGBTI activities in country?
I think LGBTI travellers will be given exactly the same sorts of consular support that all Australians get. We do have a particular emphasis these days. Ms Bishop's shortly going to announce a new consular strategy on vulnerable Australians, and I think in some kinds of countries, LGBTI travellers should certainly be classified as vulnerable Australians whose cases will get particular attention and assistance. So I can't be generic about it, but certainly in situations where LGBTI travellers could be considered vulnerable or vulnerable by virtue of the local laws or the application of the local laws by that country, they would get special support as any other vulnerable Australian would.
Right, okay. With regard, going back to your advice, I'm told that the DFAT were approached on their Russian travel advisory in 2013, and so you're saying now you're reviewing the country pages. What resources are going into that at the moment, and what resources are being put towards it? Because 2013, concern about the level of advice that was given with regard to Russia in 2013 was, at that stage, they were said that there would be a broad review of the country pages and a commitment to better information for LGBTI travellers. But we're 4 years on, and it doesn't seem that the level of information for LGBTI travellers has improved all that substantially in those 4 years.
I'm not sure I would agree with that, Senator, but the Russian travel advice specific to which you refer does make the point that although Russian law does not allow for discrimination against LGBTI persons, that in parts of the country social attitudes can be much more conservative and discrimination occurs, amounting to persecution in some areas. In reference to specific areas, well, I think we wouldn't single out LGBTI travellers in Chechnya or in the North Caucasus because we say do not travel to all Australians, regardless of sexual preferences.
So, but with regard to the urgency of getting better advice, so how urgent is that review of those country pages, and what resources are going into it?
Well, we have a section in Canberra that deals with the travel advice. They consult with all our posts around the world who provide input into the travel advice for every country. We need to keep the travel advice for all countries and for all groups and for all areas up to date. As you can imagine, that's a very large undertaking with 170-something pieces of travel advice. Certainly the advice for LGBTI travellers, from my point of view, needs to be driven through all of those travel advices and kept up to date, and it's the expectation that posts will do that. So it is certainly one of our priorities, but we have a number of priorities that we're trying to keep equally at the front of our minds.
So it's a rolling review rather than having, what was implied in your response to the person that's been communicating with me, that there would be a broad review of the country pages.
I would have to take on notice what we did about that particular answer, Senator. I think it's probably the fairest way to put it.
Okay, and so in terms of, say, the review of the Indonesia pages and the review of Aceh, how long would you expect there to be a review given the change in circumstances in both Indonesia, in Indonesia with the arrest of the 120 or whatever it was gay people in Jakarta recently, as well as the caning in Aceh?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head when Indonesia is next to be reviewed. I would expect that next time we update it, that we will have some references to those events.
So when would that be?
Well, as I said, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but we do update travel advice in response to specific events. These days it's particularly in response to terrorist events, which affect all Australians, to political events, but something like that I think could well trigger it. So I think I could undertake to you we will certainly look at those pages within the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Rice. Senator Wong.